Hi everybody. In this video I'm going to show you how I make my knobs for my old radios. I've got to make a knob for this. This is an old Brunswick Model 21. It's got a wooden knob, but it's also got a metal insert that we're going to have to duplicate. So I'm going to show you how I turn my knobs and how I make those metal inserts in this video. So I hope you enjoy it. So let's get started. Okay, here's the knob from the original one. There's a brass insert. We're going to have to put that in there. And it looks like the wood might be oak, so we'll make some oak knobs for this one. So I've got a piece of oak here. It's 4.5 inches wide, 3/4 inch thick. So we're going to cut that so I can glue some blocks together. So what I'm going to do is draw a line here and then cut that into 3 equal segments, then glue those together onto some waste stock. So here we go. All right, so I've drawn my line. See right there, it's 1.5 inches, so that'll give me 3 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch by 3/4 inch thick blocks. I'll turn that sideways. Now I'm going to cut those into 3 equal segments. Okay, so here are my 3 blocks that I've cut up. And here's a piece of waste stock. I'll glue those 3 together face to face, and then I'll glue my waste stock onto the end of it so we can turn it without getting too much into the wood we need. I'm going to cut that waste stock off, it's too big. Okay, so here we are, we're mounted up in my chuck in my lathe. That's my waste stock you can see there. I'm going to take my tail stock, part of my lathe, and put that on my center lines that I made. And we'll center that in and tighten it down. Okay, now I'm going to tighten the rest of my wood in my chuck. And then we're going to go ahead and round off that waste stock so that I can reverse the wood in the chuck and then turn my knob with the rest of the wood you see there. All right, looks good, so we're ready to go. Okay, so I'm going to now use my gouge. I'm just going to round off and move this tailstock a little bit. There we go. I'm just going to round that waste piece off so that when I turn my wood around 180 degrees, it can go up inside of my chuck and secure it really well. So now you see I've got it rounded off really well. And now I can take it out of the chuck, reverse it, put it back in that hole in the chuck right there, and cut a little extra piece off. I didn't need to have that much. So I'll put that in the chuck and we'll tighten it down. Then I can move my tailstock over and center it in the center of my wood. That's going to end up being my knob. I'm winding the tailstock in quite a bit, extending that rod because I need enough room for my tool rest. If my tailstock was too close, I couldn't get my tool rest in there. All right, so that looks good. And there we go. I also don't know if you noticed, but I changed wood. After I started looking at it, I realized it looked closer to mahogany. So instead of oak, these are 2 mahogany blocks, but everything else we've done is the same. So I'm now using a spindle gouge. I'm just going to round off that piece of mahogany so we can start turning our knob. Okay, so there's my knob. First thing I need to do is get the exact diameter. So I'm going to put my calipers on there. Now that I've got my diameter settings, I'm going to hold my calipers up underneath it. I'll use a parting gouge and put a groove in there until my calipers can just fit over that groove. That way I know I've got my wood to the right diameter. And we're just about there. All right, and that should be it right there. Okay, there's my diameter. Now I can take the rest of that wood and turn it down to that diameter, and I know I've got the diameter I need for my knob. Okay, so here we are. I'm now going to mark my knob so that I know where my valleys are and where my ridges are. You can see it's up there, and now I'm making a mark right in the center of the valley. So now I can use a real fine spindle gouge that I've ground to a real fine point so that the edges won't catch. And I'm just going to start shaping that knob. So I'm just cutting in the sides, making a nice smooth valley. Alright, takes a few passes to get in there, but it's pretty easy. Okay, so a lot of times I'll use a gauge like this, just a shape gauge, and you can see I can get the exact shape I need, and then I can use that gauge to go up and reference against my wood to see if I've got the shape I need. If I'm doing a lot of repetitive work, I'll use that gauge for sure, but a lot of times on a single knob like this, I'll just reference the knob quite a bit in one hand and just shape it. Sometimes I don't think that gauge helps me as much as just looking at the knob. So we'll shape this. Hold my knob up there. I can see how it looks. Just compare the two. And now it's just a matter of using the right tools and getting the shape you want for that knob. Compare it a few times. After a few passes, I'll have the shape that I need. My knob will be looking really good here. Okay, a couple more passes. Kind of shape it up, compare it, make sure that it's looking really good. Alright, that looks really good. I'm going to use my parting gauge, excuse me, my parting gouge now, and just cut that end of that wood off right down to the end of my knob. So I'll just cut that away. Not all the way through, because I still need to do a little bit of work, but I want to get some of that wood out of the way so I can use some other tools to round off those edges without it hitting the rest of that wood. So I'm just getting rid of the scrap. Okay, so here's my knob. And unfortunately, I didn't realize, but my battery had gone dead in my camera when I was recording the previous session. So I needed to carve out an area for that metal insert to go. So I use a bowl gouge, and I just gouge out, going at an angle, and then just gouge straight across to get a nice flat surface. And then I've got a skew, and I'll use that flat skew. You can see I can just go right in there and make a nice clean cut right there and get a flat surface for that metal insert to go onto. So that's about all I've got to do. Sometimes I'll use a little fine gouge if I have to, just to round that end off. But for now, it's looking really pretty good. So I'm just going to grab some sandpaper and sand this down a little bit, smooth it out. So I usually start at 150, 200, and finish up at 280 to 300. Okay, so here we are, looking really good. I've got it smoothed off pretty good. And I've got a couple little ridges that I've got to make. You can see right there with my skews. So I'm just going to carve those ridges in a little bit better, a little more defined. Yeah, that looks better. We'll turn this over and do the same thing on that other side. Carve that little ridge in there. And that's looking really good. I'm going to probably, what do you think? Maybe just a little more. Okay, yeah, so that's the 3 ridges. Got those carved in there, we're good to go. Okay, so I've taken it off. I cut the excess waste off with my bandsaw. Okay, now all I need to do is sand the bottom of my knob, get rid of the little bit that was left that I didn't get because I don't cut right up to the edge of it with my bandsaw. I can sand that down nice and smooth and make a nice finish. Okay, that looks really good. Okay, now I got to make a mold for that metal. So what I use is silicone, and it's got to be type 1. It's going to say type 1 right there. Type 2 silicone will not work. So I'm going to get some type 1 silicone. I've got some water, some Dawn in there. I'm just going to mix it up really good. And then I'm going to squirt enough silicone in to make a mold. Doesn't take a whole lot. What the dish detergent does is it activates the silicone so that it goes harder a lot faster and doesn't stay all gooey. Makes a pretty good molding compound. So you're going to take that silicone and you're just going to knead it, kind of like bread, inside of that water. So there it is. So I just put it back in the water and knead it and in and out. And after about 4 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes of doing this, you're going to have a really nice molding kind of a gel. So I'm going to bring my foil over here so it doesn't stick to the foil. Lay that out. Grab my knob and stick it right in there to get a good impression of that metal insert. Okay, so we'll let that set up for about, only takes a couple hours to set up. Here we are back a couple hours later. I'm going to pull that knob out of the silicone. It's gone semi-hard. Just pops out pretty easy. And there's my knob. Doesn't do any harm to it. And I'm going to have to clean the inside of that out a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to make my actual metal insert. I'm using 2-part molding resin. So equal parts A and equal parts B. And I get this from a place called moldart.com. I also get my powders. I've got brass powder, pewter powder, copper powder. So I've got equal parts A and equal parts B mixed in there. And now I'm going to put about the same amount, equal part, of my brass powder and mix that up into a slurry and then pour that into the mold. You don't have to be terribly accurate about this, but I want a nice amount of brass powder in there so when I polish it, it does look like it's a nice brass metal. So I'll just mix that up, make a slurry, then pour that into my silicone mold. Alright, so we've mixed it up for a couple minutes. Bring that over and just pour enough in. I don't want to fill it up. I don't need all that. I just need enough for the actual insert. So I'm not going to fill it all the way to the top. That would just take a lot of extra work to grind all the back of that off. I want just enough to make a nice insert. Okay, so there we are. Let that set up for a day. Come back. So here we are a day later. And I'm just going to pop that epoxy insert out and see how it looks. Usually pops out pretty easy. And you can use this mold over and over. The silicone actually makes quite a nice mold. But if you use molding gel that's made for it, you can get a really, really nice mold. Alright, so let's pop this out here. So there we are. Alright, there's my metal button. I'm going to polish this with 4/0 steel wool, and you'll start to see some of that brass come through. So here we are polishing it. And see that brass starting to come through? It's going to look great. What I want to do now is dye it so that it's that nice dark brown like the rest of them, and then just polish off the tops. Okay, so here's my insert. I dyed it using a trans-tint dye. Sometimes people will use shoe polish, but I find it doesn't stick to it very well. With the trans-tint dyes, I can dye in it. The epoxy takes that dye really, really well. So I've ground off the back of the insert so that it fits inside of there, and I'm going to use 2-part epoxy. Mix some of that up because I've got a 1/4-inch metal insert that has to go in there. I bought my metal insert from Lowe's. You can get 2 of them for a couple bucks. So I'll put my epoxy in there. Push that insert in. It's kind of stiff. Might have to grab a little mallet or hammer and hammer that in. And then we'll tap it later. Okay, now I just need to glue my insert into the top. I'm going to use that same 2-part epoxy, a little bit I've got left over. Then polish it up. Starting to look pretty good. Now here's a little bonus for you. The picture quality is not very good, but the detail of this mold is incredible. My good friend and shop buddy, Dr. Tom, took this back to his lab. He's a dentist and made a mold using dental molding material. The detail on this is just incredible. It's more detail than I really need. But I actually used this insert and redid my button with this insert, and it looks really, really good. So here's the knob. Now that I've dyed it, I used trans-tint to dye it that dark antique color, and then just burnished it a little bit with 4/0 steel wool. So the insert looks magnificent. We'll pop that in the end of the wooden knob and finish it up. So right here, these are the knobs now, almost finished with the new insert in it. I've got the clean up the one a little bit. There's some rough spots on the edges. I just need to sand those down and put a couple coats of lacquer on them, and I think we'll be in great shape. All right, so I've sanded them down and applied 1 coat of lacquer. Here's the 3 knobs all side by side. The new knob is the back left knob. And here's a view from the top. You can see they turned out just fine. Put these on there, no one will ever know that it's a replica or a reproduction. I'll probably put 1 more coat of lacquer on all 3 of them just to finish it, and we'll be done. So I hope you enjoyed this, and hopefully it'll help. Thanks a lot. Bye.